Stone, I'd like to start with the CADs that Mr. Robles went over with you, and then we'll get to what I think was Mr. Bregman calling me a liar for the last half hour, okay?
Okay.
In these CADs...
Is that appropriate? I don't think I called her a liar. I just pointed out her inconsistencies in her opening are false.
All right. Let's start with the CAD, which is Exhibit A, Detective Stone.
Yes.
At 2048, what is that in military time?
8:48.
Wasn't there a psychologist called out to the scene? Let me see if I can. There you go.
Yes.
And that psychologist actually arrived at the scene in about 5 minutes by 2053.
I don't think arrived. It says the psychologist is 10-4, which means they understand to go en route.
All right. And does it have on here when the psychologist arrived?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the rest of it.
Okay. This is an exhibit that they moved into evidence. So let me go back to where we were. This is 8:48, and the shooting was at 7:30?
Approximately.
And at that time, Mr. Boyd was no longer at the scene, was he?
No, he was at the hospital.
And in fact, here is a entry right here that he was in surgery and was critical.
That's correct.
So the psychologist wasn't called out for Mr. Boyd, was it?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
I'll rephrase, Judge. Who was the psychologist called out for, Detective Stone?
The officers.
And how is there a psychologist on call for APD?
We have a psychologist that is employed by the Albuquerque Police Department. Due to the fact that this job comes with many stressors, one of the reasons for having a psychologist is to go out there and make sure that officers are doing all right.
And is he available 24/7, he or she?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
I think that's not a leading question. What hours is he or she available?
I believe they're on call 24/7.
No one during the 3-hour standoff with Mr. Boyd ever called out a psychologist for Mr. Boyd, did they, sir?
No.
I also want to talk about one of the entries here on this CAD that was admitted at 1911. Let me find it. Uh, 1911-06, I think the comment is, subject continues to be agitated, picked up a rock and threw it at 34S. Do you see that, sir?
Threw it at 34s, threw it at officers, yes.
And you went through the CADs and the radio transmissions and also all the statements, is that right?
Yes.
And in fact, Mr. Boyd never did throw a rock at anybody, did he?
No, I believe it was a roll or a sandwich or something.
Yes, sir, and how we know that, actually, is Defendant Sandy's own statement, isn't that right?
Yes, I believe he said that.
And where did the roll or the sandwich come from?
From up near Boyd's camp. He had it with him.
Oh, yes, sir. I mean, what restaurant did it come from?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, let me show you, refresh your recollection for me to show you
Yes.
Defendant Sandy's statement to find out where the sandwich and the roll came from. Can you read that and then tell me when your memories refresh?
Yes.
Where was it from?
He got it from his tent, and he said it was from Church's Chicken or something like that.
All right. And he was eating some of it, and then he threw it down.
Towards the dog.
Towards the dog. And he said that the dog could have it, didn't he?
Yeah, something to that effect.
Okay. And so Mr. Boyd had been to Church's Fried Chicken?
I never investigated if he actually went there, but according to Keith Sandy, in the statement, that's what he said.
All right. Let's get to, well, not all the calls are on the CADs, are they?
I'm sorry, all the what? All the calls?
Not all the calls or people being dispatched are on these CADs, are they, sir?
Not everything that happened over the radio or, right, everyone that probably went there is on the CAD.
All right. For example, is Defendant Sandy being called out on these CADs that have been introduced as Defendant's Exhibit A?
Like requesting him?
Yes, sir.
No.
On these CADs, was Defendant Sandy ever requested by anybody?
No.
And there is an indication from his own words about how he got dispatched, is that right?
Yes, he was called.
That's correct. He was called on the phone rather than dispatched over the radio, is that right?
Yes.
All right. So he was called at what time on the phone? Would you like to refresh your recollection so you're correct? Okay.
I had it here yesterday.
All right. What time did he get the phone call? Just refresh your memory and tell.
5:23.
Okay. And how long was it before they called back and said?
I had that
You got that
one.
one?
5:27.
Okay, so how many minutes was it between the time he was called and the time they called back and told him they'd made a mistake, they didn't want him to come?
4 minutes.
And at that point, what did he say to them, even though the call had only been pending for 4 minutes?
Disregard that he would be around.
All right, and told them to, and was he specifically told that Sergeant Carpenter didn't want him, he wanted the taser shotgun from gangs?
Yes, the request had been made from the gang unit.
All right.
Or to the gang unit.
And this kind of call is not the kind of call that Rope would typically respond to, is it?
Like I said, back then I wasn't in Rope, but this whole thing seemed like it probably should have been a SWAT call only,
And not a Rope call?
or a gang call.
All right. Could Defendant Sandy have just since the whole reason he was being called was, well, was he being called because he was on a Rope team?
He was being called specifically because they were issued at the time taser shotguns, which field officers don't have.
Okay, so he was being called to bring the taser shotgun,
Yes,
and that's the only reason.
that was the reason he was called, correct.
And could he have just showed up at the scene and given somebody the taser shotgun?
No.
Okay. Isn't that exactly what he did?
He passed it off, well, I guess I should say, he can't give it to someone who's not trained in it, but he did pass it off to Sergeant Rick Ingram.
All right. And after he got that call and then told them disregard gang unit, who did he call?
Acting Sergeant Rick Ingram.
And who did he tell Rick Ingram to call?
He said K9.
He told Rick Ingram to call K9.
Right.
And did Rick Ingram do that?
I don't know if he actually called him.
Okay. Were there some conversations between Defendant Sandy, Rick Ingram, and Scott Weimerskirch that are not reflected on these CADs?
Yes, they spoke on a frequency called rope air that is not recorded, so I don't know what was said.
And why is rope air not recorded?
It's a frequency that is used for more sensitive investigations, undercover investigations, so those ones are not recorded.
So this jury doesn't have any record of what was said between Defendant Sandy, Rick Ingram, and Scott Weimerskirch before they got to the scene, do they?
No.
What did Defendant Sandy say that he talked to them about on rope air?
I don't exactly remember the whole conversation. I'd have to refresh my memory.
There you go, page 5.
Okay.
Okay. What did he tell them that he?
Yeah, he said that Control had called them about a guy armed with knives and that they requested a taser shotgun.
He essentially briefed the sergeant and Scott Weimerskirch, is that right?
According to him, yes.
All right, that's from his own words in his own statement.
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about the elements of aggravated assault, which I think you were asked about. Can a police officer commit aggravated assault on a citizen?
It depends on the circumstances.
Yes, sir, but can they commit aggravated assault
They
on a
could.
citizen? If a police officer points a gun at someone who has done nothing wrong, is that aggravated assault?
If it wasn't warranted, yes.
Okay. And is low ready an aggravated assault?
Depends on the encounter with the individual and what that individual took that low ready as.
Okay, and I'm just wondering if that counts, or if I have to actually point the gun at you before it becomes an aggravated assault.
You don't necessarily have to have the gun pointed at the individual. You know, if I have it down on the ground and I tell you I'm going to shoot you with this gun right now, then I think you would probably still be in fear that I could do that.
Okay, and there's a difference between assault and battery, is that right?
Yes.
Battery involves,
Actually going through with the attacking.
or striking, hitting the person, actually touching the
Yes.
person. And a police officer shooting a gun and hitting you, is that aggravated battery?
I'm going to object to leading, continue leading questions.
Well, it's a hypothetical, Judge, I'm trying to get to.
Why don't we get a hypothetical to a
Sustained.
All right. What would would it qualify for aggravated battery if someone shot someone and struck them?
Just to object to these hypotheticals now, Your Honor.
Try to get an example of aggravated battery, Judge.
When are you asking for one?
Give me an example of when a shooting would be an aggravated battery.
An aggravated battery involving a firearm is when somebody shoots another person.
Okay. In his own statement, did Defendant Sandy tell you that what he saw as far as Mr. Boyd turning before he fired his first shot?
Objection, asked and answered direct 2 days ago.
Oh, I think this has been
Sustained.
gone
It
into,
was-
Judge.
It was asked and answered.
I want to talk about the squared off position, so that's, if I can get to that. I think the defense lawyers asked you about what a squared off position was, and in his statement, didn't Defendant Sandy say that he turned from the squared off position before he fired his first shot?
Turn to the left. Yes.
Yes, sir. And he saw that he had turned from the squared off position before he fired his first shot.
Yes.
Okay, and what position was Mr. Boyd in I'm sorry, I keep getting the names confused because late in the day. So what position was Defendant Sandy, hold on, let me just take a second. What position was Mr. Boyd in when Defendant Sandy fired his first and second shots?
He was kind of not in a squared off part, but kind of starting to the left turn.
All right. And did Mr. Sandy tell you whether he saw Mr. Boyd through his scope again before he made the decision to fire a third time?
Yes.
And what did he say? Was
Still standing.
He was still standing, and so why did he fire the third shot?
Because he was still standing.
Okay. And did he admit to you that he had shot Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
And we talked a little bit about center mass and holding center mass. Yesterday, when you showed the jury what center mass was, you did it when someone was facing you.
That's correct.
Okay, so I want to ask you if, did Defendant Sandy say he shot center mass?
I'd have to refresh my memory.
Okay, let me
I
show
believe
you.
he did.
Okay, let me show you that page then.
Yes.
All right, so if someone is turning to you, you're Defendant Sandy, and I'm turned to you.
Mm-hmm.
When he said he held center mass, where would center mass be if the person is turned to you like this?
So the way you're oriented right now, center mass for me, if I'm aiming, is going to be your right shoulder, right here.
Okay, so right from here to here.
Right.
And can you explain for the record where you're saying here to here?
I'm saying from my shoulder down to my elbow.
That is what I would consider high center mass.
Right, and is that where Defendant Sandy's bullet hit, Mr. Boyd?
I believe.
Objection, because I don't want him to speculate on more bullets hit, Your Honor. I don't, just
Let me ask you,
speculation.
in an area.
Same objection.
With regard to a foundation, I'll
Not
ask,
the foundation that he knows.
I'll ask you to change the question.
And it's beyond the scope.
You know where, oh, I don't think it's down this
Where
way.
the bullets hang on is beyond the scope. I didn't ask about the bullets hanging on.
That's true. So sustained with regard to beyond the
All
scope.
right. And talking about center mass, is this area from the shoulder to the elbow, the area, well, let me try to ask the question. That's what you're referring to as center mass?
The way you're positioned now,
Yes,
yes.
sir. And is that where Defendant Sandy told you he shot?
As he started turning, he didn't really say what part of the body or how turned he was, but it's hard to say.
Okay, but if the angle is this way, center mass to you at that point means where?
Objection relevance, what it means to him at this point, because we're confusing the two.
I think he's already answered that question
Thanks, Judge.
a few times already.
All right. Were you able, in your investigation, to determine the position James Boyd was in when the shots were fired?
Approximately, yes.
And can you show the jury, can you come down and show the jury, and I'll be the shooter and you be James Boyd, where he was in relation to Defendant Sandy, and how his body was when Defendant Sandy fired the shots?
Yeah, so,
Maybe we should do it, maybe we should actually do it this direction, let the jury say, this way.
yeah, so you're gonna have to kind of stand right here.
Okay.
Officer Weimerskirch was right there. So, when Mr. Boyd first pulled out the knives, what he's talking about squaring off, from what you see in the video, now, the video is being taken from over here, so there's kind of an angle that you have to deal with. So he squared off like this.
But he didn't have his hands up like this way.
It was kind of like, they looked like they were like this with
All right.
with the knives.
Okay, so then when he turned, how was he?
He started to turn like this, and that's where I hear the first shot going, right around here.
All right. And who is in line with his right arm from this position?
Such a lack of foundations, who's in line? Is this based on video?
Based on, it's my understanding, based on video.
Okay.
Sure, and him knowing more about this case than anybody else. So,
So
Objection, the officer testified,
the,
attorney testified.
that's fine. But while you're doing this type of examination, I'll ask that you help the record by describing what the witnesses
all right, so the witness is turning to his left
Yes.
and presenting, and the witness is presenting his left side to the person who is shooting. Okay, thanks.
I think
how-
he was turning left, presenting his right side.
Did I say the exact
You
wrong
said
thing?
left
I'm
side.
sorry, Judge.
I'll just correct that for the
All right, thank you very much. How many bullets did Defendant Sandy admit that he fired?
3.
How many bullets struck Mr. Boyd from his gun?
From Keith Sandy's gun?
Yes.
Objection, lack of foundation, Your Honor, this witness is
I'll lay a foundation. Were you able to determine
beyond the scope, Your Honor.
sustained.
were you able to recover any bullets from Defendant Sandy's gun in James Boyd's body?
Beyond the scope, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Judge, and I'm going to explain, because of Ms. Desrosier's testimony, I'm going to explain why he went to Canada. And this sort of leads up to, couldn't get these bullets, found one bullet. Well, all right, let me think of a different way to get to the Desrosier bullet, okay? Were you able to recover any bullets any bullets that you could test at all from the scene?
Beyond the scope, Your Honor, objection.
Sustained as to beyond the scope
All right.
of the cross-examination of this witness.
Were there bullets that was recovered from Mr. Boyd's shoulder and his back?
Beyond the scope, Your Honor, objection.
Sustained.
During the time that Defendant Sandy was firing his 3 shots, was Mr. Boyd's back ever turned to Defendant Sandy?
Objection beyond the scope.
I don't think so, Jim.
I concur.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
All right. Based on your entire investigation, were you able to determine whether any of the bullets fired by Defendant Sandy struck Mr. Boyd?
Objection, Your Honor. Beyond the scope, and this is getting a little bit
Sustained.
argumentative
Again.
with the court.
Please move on.
Was there any additional investigation done? Well, let me see. Judge, can we approach this? Because let me tell you what I'm trying to get to. Training and experience, is it concerning to you that although Sergeant Fox requested a plan of Officer Weimer-Skirch, no plan was developed and articulated to the other officers on the scene?
Yes, not so much the perimeter officers, but the plan to Sergeant Fox maybe should have been voiced.
Okay, and based on your investigation and interviews, did you ask Weimer-Skirch if he developed a plan as instructed by Sergeant Fox?
I don't know if I remember asking that specific question during the interview.
Okay. Why is it important to have a plan and to let everybody know about it?
Again, anyone who's going to be intimately involved in the plan needs to know the details of the plan. Otherwise things can get out of control. Now, when it gets to like the SWAT team coming up with a plan, they will, whoever is going to be executing that plan around there will brief everyone in that particular area, but that they won't necessarily always, they won't brief the perimeter officers. They typically, because those perimeter officers won't be around the area, nor will they be involved in the plan.
And why is it important for people like the sniper to know what the plan is?
If the sniper is going to be a part of the execution of that plan, he should definitely know.
All right, and have you looked through the CADs to see if we know at what time the sniper, Jim Perdue, radioed to them that he could no longer see Mr. Boyd?
No, that wasn't in the CAD.
All right. What is your understanding of what happened that blocked Sniper Perdue's view of James Boyd?
When Officer Weimer-Skirch, Keith Sandy, and Rick Ingram came into their final position, kind of more on a closely elevated spot as to James Boyd, they actually got in between James Boyd and Jim Perdue.
And is there any indication that they had radioed to Jim Perdue that they were going to do this first?
I don't think so.
And so if Jim Perdue was going to try to shoot to cover this scene, who was in the way?
The officers were in the way.
And is that a good tactical plan?
Well, again, it depends on, the arrest team are going to be the ones going hands-on. So they're going to have to determine where the best place to be is. So it's kind of up to them where they need to be, not so much the sniper.
All right. What does it do as far as taking the sniper out of being able to provide cover for them?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
I don't think that was leading judge.
Well, the sniper can't provide lethal cover anymore.
Okay, because there are people in the way.
Yes.
By 5:11 on your CAD that you went through, everyone was told over the radio that Mr. Boyd was mentally ill?
Yes, that was put on the CAD and over the radio.
And I think they touched on this, but is it true that they never told Mr. Boyd that they were going to arrest him or take him to jail? Is that one of the things you talked about?
Yes, they stayed away from that conversation.
And what was the reason that he kept saying he didn't want to give up his knives?
Well, he kept saying that they didn't have the authority to, and because they were further attacking him and stuff like that.
Did he express fear that they might hurt him if he gave up his knives?
Yes, he did.
Mr. Robles asked you a question about that he kept saying, I'm under assault, when he was not under assault. I think that was the way Mr. Robles phrased the question.
Yes.
From the moment that the open spaces officers arrived, was there ever a time from that moment until 2 hours and 45 minutes later when he was shot that somebody wasn't pointing a gun at Mr. Boyd at this scene?
Again, there were officers in the low ready, so I don't know if they always had their guns drawn. You could see clearly from the videos and the shadows that when Mr. Boyd, even though you couldn't see him in the video approach, you would see the guns come raised up, and obviously they would tell him to back away, and when that would happen, you would see the guns come back down. Now, the guns were always drawn.
Right, and Mr. Boyd could see that the guns were always drawn when they were around him, right?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, the officers didn't do anything to try to hide the fact that they had drawn guns on Mr. Boyd, did they?
I'm going to allow it.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, that's not something that you would want to hide from somebody that you're trying to arrest.
Okay. they wanted them to see that they had pulled guns on him.
Right, again, it goes back to the show of force.
All right.
I couldn't hear any objection.
I'm sorry, I've said objection leading again, Your Honor.
And is it your testimony that Mr. Boyd, I'm sorry, Judge, did you rule?
I just overruled.
Okay. Is it your testimony that Mr. Boyd was unreasonable in his fear that the officers might shoot him?
I mean, it's hard to say. I didn't get a chance to interview James Boyd.
Okay. And the ultimate result of this encounter was that what?
He was shot.
All right. I think they touched on 513. They requested ambulance and the fire department. And can you say why they requested the ambulance at that time?
In case a use of force occurred and someone needed to have medical attention right away.
Okay. And does the CAD show how long after the shooting that rescue was actually able to get up there to the scene to take care of it?
No.
How long, is it your understanding, would it have taken, first of all, where were they?
They were at the top of Copper, the street Copper, at the parking lot to the open space.
Right, and so how long, just to get all the gear and get up there, would it take after he got shot?
So-
Objection to the extent that it calls for speculation.
I think he's got the foundation for it, Judge. I can lay more if you'd like. You've walked from Copper up there many, many times, have you not, Detective Stone?
Yes.
Okay. So how long would it have taken them to get all their gear and get up there to that site to treat Mr. Boyd?
Object, as soon as facts have evidence that they walked.
Did they,
No allowed.
how did they get there, Detective Stone?
They did walk up there. It would have taken several minutes.
All right. Did any officer administer first aid to Mr. Boyd at the scene before the rescue team arrived?
I don't.
Objection, relevance, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Is there an SOP on having a camera and turning in a camera footage?
Yes.
And is it enough that you turn in the card from your taser, from your, it's a lapel cam is what
Lapel cam.
Sandy had. Is it enough that you turn in this? Is that all the policy says? That all you have to do is turn it in?
You have to download the video and give it to criminalistics, so
All right.
yes.
Well, do you have to turn your lapel cam on?
Yes.
Okay, and that's what the SOP says, 139.1, that they will use the tape digital recorder to document the incidents listed below, including all of these things that might apply to Mr. Boyd. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if an officer didn't turn on his lapel cam, would that be a violation of the SOP?
Yes.
When you looked on this, there was nothing on the lapel cam that recorded anything about this encounter, was there?
No.
We talked about how this case has been treated a little differently from a regular homicide investigation a little bit yesterday, but I wanted to ask you about one more thing that happened. Can you tell the jury when you reviewed all of these radio transmissions with the CAD tapes?
Objection beyond the scope, Your Honor.
Overruled.
I don't remember which day, but it would have been as soon as I got them from the from like APD control, radio control, and when I got all the videos from criminalistics.
And did you spend time over the last month or so reviewing them again?
Yes.
And at whose request did you re-review all the radio transmissions and compare them to the CADs?
Mr. Robles.
And that's the lawyer for defendant Perez.
Yes.
Have you ever, in any homicide case, ever before, well, first of all, how much time did it take you to do all that?
Well, I've gone over them before, so it didn't take me very long.
All right. Have you ever, in any other case, when the lawyer for a defendant in a homicide case requested you to do something, have you ever spent time doing things at the direction of the defense lawyer?
Objection, relevance, Your Honor.
Overruled.
I've never had one ask or send me anything before.
All right. And that is different from what you've done in other homicide cases, is that right?
Exactly. No one's ever reached out to me like that before.
All right. Is it fair to say that you have a pro-police bias in this case, Detective Stone?
Pro-police?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm a police officer, so.
Right.
I do believe in police officers, but I also believe in conducting a thorough investigation.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is from the questions about asking whether or not you interpreted Mr. Boyd's actions as a surrender. You're aware that Mr. Boyd said right before he came down, "I want to walk with you." Is that right?
I'd have to listen to or watch the video again. I don't exactly know what he said.
Okay.
But he said something to that effect.
Right, and he said something to them about, "I'm trusting you to keep your word." Is that right?
Correct.
And one of the ways that a person can surrender is if they're told to lay on the ground, if they turn and lay on the ground. Is that right?
If they're told to lay on the ground exactly that way, yes.
Right, and Mr. Boyd wasn't told to put his hands up in the air. Knives, right before he got shot.
No,
He was told to lay on the ground.
I think get down.
Right before he was shot, he said, "Don't make fun of people," didn't he?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. You don't find that to be an aggressive statement, do you?
Well, I find it out of the ordinary, but then again, he was suffering from mental illness.
Okay. You admit that if someone's ordered to lay on the ground and they lay on the ground, that could be a way to surrender.
Objection, lead.
Asked and answered.
Okay. Thanks, Judge. That's all I have.
Would you mind moving the displays?
Sure,
so
I can,
see
Judge.
the juror and detective be released? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It looks like there's a question. So Ms. McGinn, you'll grab that.
Is that okay if I get this, Judge?
I guess let me have Sherry get it.
Well, I'll have Sherry get it. Why was the beanbag shotgun never used at the time of the shooting?
Why was the beanbag shotgun never used?
Uh-huh.
There was no beanbag shotgun with the arrest team.
They didn't take one up there,
No.
okay? How many beanbag shotguns were there at the scene at the time that they went up there?
4 that I know of.
Okay. Did you ever, now let me see if I can get this one right. Did you ever ask Officer Weimerskirch how he thought his advancing on Mr. Boyd changed the plan regarding Detective Sandy and his need to cover him?
If I understand the question correctly, Officer Weimerskirch closed the distance and didn't realize that he had gotten so close to Mr. Boyd and caused what happened.
Okay. In your investigation, did you learn who between Sandy, Ingram, and Weimerskirch was supposed to be the person who was going to be hands-on and arrest Mr. Boyd?
As far as hands-on, I was never told who was going to do the handcuffing.
That wasn't part of the plan?
Not that they ever told me, no.
Okay. Thanks, Sharon. I think those are the 3 questions. And Mayor Patrick Stone, you excuse.
You're excused. I'm going to ask that you not discuss anything about your testimony until this case is at a close. I'm not sure if I could tell you for sure you won't be called back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hate to tell you, things have moved so fast today in comparison with the other days that we don't have any other witnesses for this afternoon. We could have some more bench conferences if the jurors really want to stay for another hour or so.
So that'll conclude the presentation of evidence for this week. We'll resume again Monday morning. Just to keep things rolling, I'd like for you to come back at 8:20 at the first floor jury assembly room. We'll bring you upstairs around 8:30 and continue with the testimony. I'm going to change my request and instruction for you a little bit this weekend. I'm going to ask that you not look at any newspapers. And otherwise, with regard to any kind of publicity about the case, if you discover that something's being broadcast, please make sure that you leave the room immediately or get away from the information. So again, just don't discuss the case with other jurors or with any other people. No one's allowed to discuss the case in your presence. You must not conduct any independent research about the case, and do not express any opinion about the case or form any fixed opinions until the case is finally submitted to you for your review and for your decision. I really appreciate your attention and your time, and I know it's been a long week, so have a very pleasant weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. Please stand.